My son, walk not thou in the way with them. My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. My son, walk not thou in the way with them.
Patrick now struggled to perform his parish duties and keep the roof over his children's heads.
My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. My son, walk not thou in the way with them. Refrain thy foot from them.
He had no idea that his daughters had plans to make money through their writing, let alone that their first book had finally been published.
It's full of misprints. Look, they've put tumbling stars instead of trembling stars. It makes a nonsense of the whole poem.
We are published authors. Last. But if our book is going to sell, it must be noticed. I shall forward another £2 to Aylett & Jones so they can send review copies to all the best periodicals.
We can ill afford such a sum.
It's not an expenditure, it's an investment.
But Charlotte was wrong. The reviewers were more interested in the identity of the mysterious Bell brothers than in the work itself. Their book of poems sold 2 copies. Their brothers' dreams were fading fast.
Branwell had become hopeless, incapable of filling any respectable station in life. Even his plan to make money by a novel had come to nothing. But I began to wonder whether Emily and Anne and I should try our hands at a novel. After all, we had been writing stories since childhood.
Determined this time to write something that would sell, Charlotte abandoned the fantasy themes of childhood and made a first unsteady attempt to base a novel on real life.
My story is to be called The Professor. It is about a young man who goes to work as a teacher in Brussels. He labours throughout life, enjoys only a mixed and moderate cup of happiness.
It was written from a male point of view and was stilted and artificial. Her sisters, however, wrote from the heart.
My heroine is a plain parson's daughter called Agnes Grey. She is the youngest in the family and will surprise everyone by becoming a governess to try and save the family's fortunes. At last it was decreed that I should take charge of the young family of a certain Mrs. Bloomfield. Her husband had realised a very comfortable fortune, but could not be prevailed upon to give a greater salary than £25 to the instructress of his children.
You can't tell me what to do. You're just the governess. I hate you.
Anne's novel rang true because it was based on her own unhappy experiences. But Emily either could not or would not abandon the themes and characters of her fantasy world of Gondal, and she simply transported a violent childhood tale of passion and revenge to a rural Yorkshire setting.
My novel is called Wuthering Heights. Let me in, or I will make you repent, Gurnt Heathcliff. If I were you, I'd go stretch myself over Cathy's grave and die like a faithful dog. I can't imagine how you think of surviving her loss. I was unnerved by terror when Heathcliff flung himself on Earnshaw's weapon and wrenched it from his grasp. The charge exploded. And the knife closed into its owner's wrist. Heathcliff pulled it away by main force, slitting up the flesh and thrust it dripping into his pocket. His adversary had fallen senseless with pain. The ruffian kicked and trampled on him and dashed his head repeatedly against the flags.
While the sisters were busy with their novels, Some long-awaited news roused Branwell from his depression.
Brandy. John, have some brandy. This calls for a celebration. You see before you the happiest philosopher that ever lived.
What's happened then?
He's dead. Isn't it wonderful? Providence has smiled on us.
Who's dead?
Robinson. I know not how and care less. Before long, I shall be the husband of the lady whom I love best in all the world. A toast to the philosopher and his future bride. And another, that when I marry, I might be a gentleman of leisure and devote myself to poetry.
Poetry.
It took the sisters only 2 months to finish their novels, and they sent them off with new hope of finding fame and fortune. A sudden summons to the Black Bull from Mrs. Robinson's coachman sent Branwell into ecstasy.
This was his moment. He was convinced that in a day or so, he'd be back with his Lydia. He stayed with that coachman for 2 hours, and then landlord sent for me. Something had started to burn up inside him, fierce-like. He was having some kind of fit. The coachman told him Robinson's will said if his wife ever saw Branwell again, she'd inherit nothing. I took him back to parsonage, and it were my last Martha, parson's maid, who had to look after him.
My pa found out later it was all a lie. Her husband's will said no such thing. Mrs. Robinson had made it all up. Wasn't 5 minutes before she went off and married a wealthy relative. But our Branwell, he was broken in heart and mind.
My son had broken the 7th commandment and was being punished on earth for his sin, but 'twas that woman tempted him, and she would reap her reward in hell.
Either to ease her conscience or to buy his silence, Mrs. Robinson continued to send Branwell money. He squandered it all on drink, weakening his already fragile health, until his sisters lost all patience. Charlotte's hopes for their novels had been dashed. Finally, an unscrupulous publisher called Thomas Courtly Newby offered to print them at the girl's expense. He demanded the sum of £50, nearly £2,000 in today's money. Emily and Anne agreed, but Charlotte parcelled up her manuscript for the 7th time and sent it to Smith Elder and Company.
These were mournful days. Papa's cataracts had become so bad that he was almost helpless. I decided that Emily and I would go to Manchester to find an eye surgeon who could perform the new and delicate operation needed to restore his sight.
Patrick's cataract operation was carried out before the days of anaesthetic. The old man sat patient and firm for 15 minutes of excruciating pain while they removed the complete lens from his eye. After the ordeal, Patrick was ordered to lie quietly for a month to prevent bleeding. Charlotte stayed to nurse him, but while Patrick prayed silently for the restoration of his sight, she found the time hung heavily on her hands.
I had a raging toothache and could neither sleep nor eat, so I took up a pencil and paper and sought refuge in my writing. I imagined an orphan child, and I called her Jane Eyre. She becomes a governess and falls in love with her employer, Mr. Rochester.